financial sustainability risk, which I know you're going to come on to later on the agenda. And there's also a risk around saving. So I think it's a legitimate question to ask. We could always reference the report that goes to Cabinet and Overview and Scrutiny Committee, but I think bringing the full report to this committee in the way that it's presented there, it tends to go to Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But my suggestion would be that we bring it to Audit Committee as part of the update on the risk register that you look at each meeting. I'm looking at Manesh. I can only just see him in the room. It's most meetings, I think, isn't it, Manesh, that we report on the risk register, and I think it's a legitimate question to raise there in terms of progress.
Manesh, you want to just come in?
Yeah, that's doable. So the corporate risk register that we have has that particular risk highlighted. So in future reports, we can capture information about where we are with the delivery of savings.
Thank you, Tyrone. Okay, so we got a call out on the agenda. Is it going to be a quick one, Councillor Rossetti? Thank you.
I just made the question and I'm happy to receive the response in writing. It's about point 16, the debtors. If I understand the table, there is 337 million of uncollected debt. And there is a statement at the beginning that says the council has considered the collectability of the debt and has impaired the debt for the amount it might not recover. So I would like to understand if this is that is on the table on page 132, is the amount that the council think will be able to recover or not, and if why the council doesn't think they will be able to recover some of this debt. There is local taxation, which I believe is the council tax, 50 million. Parking, I mentioned earlier on, 55. I think the housing benefit overpayment has been mentioned. So I would like to understand why it's not possible to recover this debt. If maybe it's more expensive to chase this debt than to recover, and because we see this every year. So, and it's a lot of money. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rossetti. So he wants to come in.
For brevity, I'm happy to receive a response.
A written response?
Yeah.
Okay, so if that question could be noted for the written response, I think that would be better. I think there's quite a lot in there. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. So we'll move on. So we'll move on to the next item, but I would like to read the recommendation for this item first. So the recommendation is that the committee notes the content of the report and the appended draft account statement of accounts. Okay. So I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the annual governance statement. Can I now invite Officer to introduce the report, Manesh Jani?
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present the annual governance statement for the financial year 24-25. This statement provides a comprehensive overview of the governance framework, processes, and internal control environment that we have had in the authority for the past year, and aligns to our commitment to good governance, accountability, and effective stewardship of our resources. Under the Audit Committee's terms of reference, the Audit Committee is responsible for reviewing and approving the annual governance statement, which is why you have it here. You will see that there is a lot of background information on the preparation of the annual governance statement, and that's provided at page 244 of your pack. If I can just go through quick highlights on the statement. You see on the statement that we have confirmation of compliance. So the statement confirms our ongoing compliance with relevant governance codes, in particular the SIPFA Solis framework, which is a framework that requires us to at least appraise our governance arrangements once a year. And the committee has had papers over the last couple of years where we've done that more frequently. We've also reviewed the effectiveness of internal control. We have assessed the effectiveness of our systems of internal control, including financial, operational, and risk management controls. And the statement details the processes in place to identify, evaluate, and manage risks to the achievements of our objectives. There is an action plan progress which essentially sets out how we've reviewed progress against the actions we've planned in previous statements, noted the completion of those actions or the status as at the end of the year. And you'll see that this is part of the framework of governance, and it's attached at page 272 of your pack. We have nevertheless identified further improvements that need to be made, and they're essentially the same governance issues as was reported to the committee back in March 2025. And those issues are shown on pages 281 to 291 of the pack. If I can just quickly just mention what they are. There are 6 issues where we think our governance is not as robust as it should be. The first is that we need to ensure we deliver savings identified in our medium-term financial plan, and to plan to live within our financial means. We've also identified that we need to continue to embed improvements across our asset management portfolio. We need to continue to improve our housing program and deliver improvements in the delivery of the housing services. We need to continue to strengthen our information governance arrangements. We need to have a high performing workforce that delivers great services. And it's difficult at the moment to attract, develop and retain talent. And that's something we need to do better. And we also recognize that there are weaknesses as regards our procurement activities and contract management. So those 6 areas are identified and noted on the annual governance statement. Just to conclude then, in essence, the annual governance statement provides assurance that the authority has maintained a sound system of governance of internal control, and that the statement accurately reflects the governance arrangements and offers a clear basis for ongoing scrutiny and enhancement by this committee. Welcome your feedback and any comments you may have.
Thank you, Mnesh. Questions? Councillor Worrell?
Thank you. Sorry, let me just find the right page. Thanks. Yeah, so just going to the slightly earlier bit in the report where it kind of goes through the governance principles and any action required from and it seems that there's kind of varying degrees of detail given as to the sort of identified gaps or action required. So for example, the one around behaving with integrity and all of the different sort of requirements within that, it just says ensure full compliance by officers with the requirements set out, and that doesn't really tell me what the kind of assessment is and what's being done there. So yeah, I wondered if you could expand on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. So the way the governance framework is set out is quite prescriptive, and there is a code called the CIPFA Solace Code, which essentially sets out what good governance ought to look like in local authorities. And what you have there in that table is essentially all the key principles of what the code requires us to demonstrate. And we've benchmarked ourselves against those principles. And where there are essentially compliance to 100%, what you have is just a link to evidence that that's the case. And where there are gaps, however significant, we've identified what they look like. And from that, we've then crystallized the remaining significant matters and reported that in the paper. So essentially what that means in terms of this particular table is that for those areas where the governance is in place, you won't have that much detail. What you will have is a link to a paper or a document, usually a strategy of some type, that sets out where we're meeting those standards.
So the behaving with integrity one, that's your assessment is kind of full compliance with that one.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, Councillor Diaguides.
Just a small thing. It's about you're referring to somewhere about our handling of complaints. You know, the things and about those that have been found, you know, against us, etc. When I read that report, it looks like we are fine. We're doing great. But then I've seen press reports saying that we are one of the worst authorities in the country in terms of the ombudsman finding complaints against us, finding against us, not just simply referred to. What's your explanation about that?
That's a good one. Okay, so I think if I can answer this in from a slightly different perspective, Councillor Diaguides. So essentially, when we do those appraisals, there are different levels of gaps in compliance with the SIPFA Solus code. The six that have been So the six that have been identified are the most significant matters. There are other areas where we're not as good as we could be, but they're not regarded as the most significant. And for those, there are other processes that apply. Loosely, and I do mean loosely, I think there is reference to the fact that we are not very good at managing information and information governance, but that's through the prism of responding to members' inquiry and freedom of information requests. And I think you can attach complaints as part of that appraisal, where basically as part of our responsibility, we engage and respond to people who want information from us in a timely way, and we're not very good at that.
Okay, Councillor Diaguides, Councillor Brennan.
I was looking specifically at the issue of housing improvement. I'm just interested by, well, it's a sort of the use of statistics compared with lived experience, which I'm just interested in your view on, because in my ward, I have the most terrible issues with housing, lack of housing improvement, if you like. Yet the way the statistics looks, it says 80% are decent homes are rising and thriving. It doesn't look too bad, but the situation appears to be quite serious if you live it. And from my point of view, when I do members' inquiries, I'm constantly getting back things saying, we put in a member, you know, the people came around, they said they'd do the work and they told us what we needed, then they went away and didn't do it. So there is an issue and it doesn't seem to be reflected here. I don't know if you have any comments.
No, that's a good point. So the point to note is that there is a significant governance issue. So notwithstanding the fact that you've got the comments that you have in the report, we regard the fact that actually how we manage our housing portfolio isn't really where it should be at. It should be better than this. The commentary that you have is from the service. So the appropriate officer has updated the committee on where they've managed to improve some elements of the governance around the housing portfolio. But that's by no means to say that we've got there completely. So what you have is essentially a sort of a timeline to some improvements, but there are other improvements that still need to be made.
Councillor Jameson.
So with housing, which is a constant problem, and governance, I think we have a real problem with allocations. So like I've got an estate, for instance, that's we've recently gone to court to get somebody out who was effectively ruling the roost and with the ASB and drug dealing, and then reallocated somebody who's doing exactly the same thing. So then council resources are again used I mean, it's just so ridiculously inefficient because we've finally gotten rid of someone and then we just replace with another person doing exactly the same thing.
This is mainly like casework,
Yeah.
but it's I don't know.
It's
If
a
you,
housing revenue
Yeah,
thing.
it's, but I don't know if you can try to answer best as you can. But I think it's mainly about the casework. But anyway, I'll leave it to Manish to.
This is one of the key controls around how we let property. And there is a process for this, it's choice-based lettings, where people make an application for housing and they are assessed in terms of their priority. And when their turn comes up, as in they're identified as the highest priority person, they're allocated a house or a home of some type. The factors that go into selecting who is applicable may not extend to their antisocial behavior, because actually that might not be known at the time the property is allocated. So essentially what happens is that a person is allocated a property based on their priority. If there are then other factors that appear, then other action can be taken. It is unfortunate, I suppose, in this particular instance, that we have a case where the person coming in is essentially the same as the person who left, but the same process would apply again in terms of then responding to that person's antisocial behavior matters. In other cases, that's not the case. In other examples, once we've identified an individual and taken action against them, the property is then reallocated to somebody else who doesn't have those tendencies.
Thank you, Councillor. So if there's no any further rest. Did I miss you? Are you repeating it? All right, rest gone.
Sorry, Chair, came late to the party. I mean, Minesh, and similar to the councillor's questions, I've seen some of the gaps and the proposed actions. In some areas, we have context as to why there's a gap or why we need an approved action, and I just don't see that consistency. So I think to the councillor's point around ensure full compliance, in my mind, when I read that, I was like, so we 25%, 30% compliant, or we're not compliant. So that kind of context, or where we say we need to review regulations. When was the last time regulations were reviewed and they're due for another review? It just gives the reader a bit more clarity around where we are with either meeting the standards or not meeting the standard.
Thank you. So look, that's useful comment. Thank you. I think what we could do is, as part of the audit cycle, if we want assurances around some aspects of our governance where we think the governance might not be as robust, or we want to test it to a higher, to get assurance, essentially, just to test that it's as robust as we think it is, we can certainly program that as part of the audit cycle and make sure that we get the assurances we need. Quite happy to do that. Yeah.
So this document, just to give the reader a little bit more context as to why the gap is there, or how the extent of the gap, and what we're doing to close it.
Got it. Okay. Yes, in some ways, actually, this document is probably an over-engineered document, certainly from a perspective of what the expectation is going forward. The annual governance statement is meant to be quite a concise and a sort of sprinty document. The reason it's presented in the way it is that because our local code of corporate governance wasn't really up to date till last year. So I wanted to make sure the committee had oversight of all of our key components of governance this time around. But from next year, the statement will be a lot more succinct with just the key governance issues, and the audit cycle will provide the assurances around some of the other governance arrangements. So yeah, noted.
Thank you. Thank you, Minesh. So recommendation for this item is for the audit committee to review and approve the draft 24-25 annual governance statement attached at Appendix A, at the audit committee notes the approval timescale and processes for the draft 2024 and 2025 annual government statement. Thank you. So I'll move on to the next item, which is item 10, the annual head of audit report. Can I invite officers to introduce the report? Minesh Jani, and over to you, Minesh.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is a culmination of the internal audit activity throughout the last financial year and provides the audit committee with an independent and objective opinion on the governance, risk management and internal controls of the areas that the internal auditors looked into. As your head of audit, I am required by professional standards, particularly the public sector internal audit standards, to make sure that I report annually to you with the outcome of the internal audit work and to confirm that I've met the standards that are required of me. The purpose of this report is to provide assurance based on the internal audit activity and for me to give you an overall opinion on the systems of control at the authority, an opinion on the adequacy of governance, risk and internal controls, and to set out the work that we've carried out over the last year. You'll see that the report has many appendices. There's quite a lot of information here. So if I just walk you through the main parts of those appendices. The first appendix is Appendix A, which is the actual annual report. The report sets out the role of internal audit here, the approach we've adopted, the coverage of the audit work, the analysis from that work, and any significant issues arising from the work that internal audit have done. So starting with my opinion, you'll see that I've given an adequate level of assurance over the systems of internal control, except for those areas where we know that the governance arrangements and internal controls are not strong enough. I recognize in that opinion that the level of assurance where we've not given a satisfactory level of assurance to the individual assignment areas is actually larger than those areas where we have given an adequate level of assurance, which is a slightly odd situation. But that's premised on the fact that a lot of the work that I do is risk-based, and therefore I frequently go into audit areas where I know that the risks are not being managed as well as they should be. And I'm encouraged to do that by the corporate directors to make sure that internal audit then are able to input into what should be set up going forward. Nevertheless, I think the numbers of limited assurance reports is high, and it's something that we should be looking to bring down in the next few years. There are, in my report, you'll see that I've identified specific areas where I know the internal controls are not robust, and we've spoken about one or two already at this meeting. But there are essentially the three areas that I think I've identified before and reported to the committee. So they relate to our procurement contracting arrangements, including contract management, because I think that could be improved. We've carried out some reviews last year in that space again, and there are some improvements, but there is still some way to go there. The other area is around property and property management. There is more work to be done there, and we heard from the director of the service their plans at the March meeting. I've identified housing as an area where I think we need to do more to improve our services. A lot of the internal audit work that we've done around the housing area have had limited assurances in the past. There are signs that that's getting better, but there is still some way to go. And a new area that comes to light from the work that we did last year is around the financial arrangements in adult social care. So there were a number of audits that looked at essentially the financial internal controls, and they weren't found to be as robust as they could be. The one I would point to as an example is around the financial assessment of clients. So this is an audit where we were checking specifically at the processes for how we assess the eligibility of people who are seeking our help in making a contribution towards the cost of their care. And what we identified was that there were gaps in how effective we were, and therefore we were potentially paying more cost than we should have been. So that's added to the list for this time. Just picking up on the point around the numbers of limited assurances. On the contrary to that, I am pleased to also report that we had 6 areas where we got substantial levels of assurance, which is also quite high compared to previous years. There are a number of tables and graphs that I've identified, but if I can just go into a couple of key points. From the analysis of all of the different audit areas, there are, I think, 3 or 4 key messages that come out where I think the authority could improve its internal control environment. The first area is around our ability to make sure that before we make a decision, that we carry out a proper appraisal of whatever it is that we are trying to do. So being well informed and being risk aware of what we are undertaking and being in a position then to act on whatever happens when we're trying to do what we do. Second area, I think, is around quarterly assurance and monitoring arrangements. So this is around making sure that there is a proper arrangement to monitor what it is that is actually happening after we've set off to do what we are trying to do, and making sure that the internal control environment is robust. The third area is around performance management. So this is just making sure that we have good set of performance indicators and a performance management regime that tells us if things are not going to plan early. We genuinely find out quite late that things have not gone to where they should have been, but we should be looking to do just to find that out a bit earlier. And the final area is around our compliance, just making sure we comply with our policies, procedures, and making sure that those are up to date so that we are following the right path. I'm aware that I've jumped a number of different aspects, but I'm happy to take any questions as they arise and dive into those areas in a bit more detail.
Okay, Councillor Rossetti.
The past full year, and I think there is a bit of a work and because in percentage the number have gone from 13%, 8%, 12%, and 26% of recommendation not implemented in year 23-24, and at the same time in 324 it states that last year there were 129 recommendations raised, which is an increase from last year where there were 97. So I'm just wondering if there is a sort of a perception of why the number of recommendations not implemented is increasing, because I think somewhere else in the report you mentioned that in some cases the limited assurance report is because of the services themselves that ask for an audit so that they can improve. So we see sort of instead the number of recommendations, not implemented increasing. So wondering if we are a sort of a slippery slope of what is going on, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rossetti. So implementation of recommendations is key to the work that I do. it's a lot of effort to get an audit completed. And really, the final output has to be the recommendations improving the governance, the internal control, and the risk management. So on that basis, I think your question is very pertinent. When I've looked into the percentages of recommendations not implemented, and I'll be honest, I've focused on priority 1 recommendations because they're the most important. The recommendations not implemented tend to lie in those areas where we know that the authority is trying to do something, but it's going to take a while to fix. So they tend to be in the areas that we are aware of already. There are other recommendations that have not been implemented, and to aid that process, we've introduced a new, or are planning to introduce a new software, a new system, which captures every single recommendation and requires management to update the status of those on a regular basis. At the moment, one of the things that we are doing is providing the committee with assurances only when audit carry out a follow-up. There is a stage prior to that we can apply, and that's what we're doing, which is that management give assurances to the audit committee that the auditors have raised this recommendation, and we can show the status of those. I think by having that system, and by increasing that oversight, we should see an improvement in the implementation status. That's not. I don't think that will mean that all the key priority 1 recommendations will get implemented sooner, because we know what they are. But I think you'll see an improvement in priority 2 and priority 3 recommendations.
Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. I just wanted to sort of pick up on what you said about some of the issues in housing and the fact that we still have limited assurance around quite key things such as damp and mold. I feel like the narrative we get from the housing service, for instance, in their kind of positive work with the regulator, in the fact that you know, they had a sort of mock inspection of the new consumer standards and they received a C2, is kind of that everything's positive and going in the right direction. And then things like this feel like a bit of a reality check. And I guess I'm a bit concerned. Do you think that these kind of messages from audit actually are flowing through and that the adequate work is being done there? Because I guess I'm concerned that how well it's doing depends on kind of what metric you look at it through, and there's a risk of you know, complacency. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. We're looking at this from 2 different prisms. One is about the delivery and what we're doing from a service perspective, what the service is doing in terms of improving aspects of its operations, and I, as sort of an audit perspective, I'm focused on making sure that the internal controls are robust. It is possible to have a scenario where you can have a service with poor internal controls, but still delivering. But the issue with that is that longer term, that is not going to be sustainable, nor is it going to be an efficient and an effective way of organizing our functions. So the need for a good way of doing things with the right checks and balances is key. So I'm aware that we have had reports where the service has demonstrated that it's carried out an external review, and those reviews are identifying improvements, which is brilliant. But I'm still looking at the service to make sure that they implement the right level of internal control, so that these improvements are sustained and they embedded in the service.
Ras, you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minesh. Minesh, just regarding the recommendations that haven't been implemented, what I find at my other committees, as well as when I was in professional services, what worked generally well is when the audit committee had sight of the key recommendations that are causing the limited or no assurance. And then the audit committee can hold the officers to account on either the timeline or lack of action or lack of plan. And I guess if we don't have that, because to be honest, this committee sees a lot of reports over the year, and we tend to, well, I'll speak for myself, I tend to lose focus on what we've seen and what we haven't seen. So if it's not top of mind at each meeting of what the key outstanding issues are, I'm not sure how effective we've been in helping the officers get to implementing these. So can I humbly request through the chair, of course, that we get at least the priority one findings tabled at each of these meetings to see what the due dates are, what the progress is, and what the challenges are in implementing.
Absolutely. Yeah, agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Minesh. So I have a question, Minesh. So you highlighted the areas of limited assurance or nil assurance, such as like procurement, housing, and so forth. But I'm also concerned in relation to the schools, because I know they haven't received nil assurance, but their position has deteriorated. So we have to ensure that those services does not fall onto that level that we don't want to expect them to. So could you please tell me what you have been doing with the schools in order to keep that assurance to the level that we are expecting them to be? So that's one question. Second question that I have, which is on page 328, one of the audit, the status for the St. Peter's RC Infant School, the audit was postponed. If you can explain, there are two schools there. Why were those audits were postponed? Is there a reason for it? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so unfortunately, yes, the performance from an internal audit perspective on the level of assurances we've assigned to schools has deteriorated. Last year, we saw a marked improvement in the assurances, with very few schools getting a low level of assurance. Unfortunately, in 24-25, of the 12 schools audited, 7 were assigned limited assurance. And that's, yes, that is slightly concerning. So to respond to that, there are 3 or 4 key actions that have begun. So the first thing is to reappraise the school business managers, the head teachers, and the chair of governors on the requirement of the audit and the need for the right internal control environment. So to help them with that, I'm planning to hold a number of seminars, sessions with those key officers so that they're aware of what good internal control should look like in key areas of their operations. So that's the first thing. Second thing is around the expectations from internal audit. In talking to the schools forum, one of the things that came out was the possibility that the auditors were asking for information which didn't really feed back into the assurance. So I'm just going to double check and make sure that the audit program that we have is consistent with the school's finance manual and ensure that we are appraising schools for the right areas in the right way. And the third thing is around regular bulletin to schools to help them understand where there's key areas of weaknesses, what good ought to look like. So you'll see that in my report, I've identified a lot of schools struggle with maintaining an asset register. This is a relatively straightforward thing to have in place. And I'm sure that if we could develop a good format of a register, a number of schools could save a lot of time having to reinvent one and perhaps not quite get it right in the first instance. So there is something about just highlighting what that good looks like and providing that information to them. So that's the plan. And hopefully we'll see an improvement in the assurances for next year. If I can just pick up Councillor Rossetti's point, because I think Councillor Rossetti, sorry, I missed this question around the 129 recommendations. That 129 relates to schools. the numbers for system was about 205 from memory. So there's a higher proportion of recommendations there, just to pick that up. And the two schools that were postponed, one is easy, the school's closing. So that's easy. The other one, I'm not entirely sure, but if I can come back to you, I think it was postponed just because the school business manager was not available, but we have actually audited that quite early in this year's cycle.
Minesh.
Yeah. So Councillor Jamieson, what's happened is that we don't have an overarching system, software, to capture all of the procurement activities in the council. So what that means is that in terms of maintaining evidence to show that proper contract management is taking place, that is essentially done contract by contract in individual services. Because the service itself, the procurement service, hasn't been able to establish a system for capturing that, we still don't have the level of assurance we need that contract management is working as well as it should in the authority.
Yep. Does that answer your, yep. Okay. So we don't have a system yet to address, but there's a plan going forward. Okay. Thanks so much. So I'll move.
Fine. Shouldn't that be highlighted in the governance report? Very strongly. I mean, we do that again and again every year.
Yeah, so quite right, Councillor Dikides, it has been picked up on the annual governance statement as well. This is one of those issues where the authority hasn't been able to respond as quickly as we all would like in putting in place the appropriate structures. But I think if I can perhaps ask the chair to get an update from Tarin and the appropriate officer to circulate to the audit committee.
Okay, Councillor Dikides. Yeah, great. Thank you. So the recommendation for this item for the committee to note the content of the head of the audit and the risk management annual audit report and assurance statement for 24-25 and the accompanying appendices. Okay, is that noted? Thank you. I'll move on to the next item, which is item 11, updated corporate risk register. Minesh.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick introduction to this, and my apologies for the actual risk register size. I mean, it's quite hard to read, and I appreciate that. I think for the next time we've got to find a way of getting an A3 version of that register.
It will be also helpful to print with a colour so members can identify
Sure.
the heat map.
Yeah. So just a very quick introduction. The corporate risk register has been reviewed and refreshed, and it was presented to the corporate leadership team in June. And the version you have is that was presented. There's one thing I've noted, that there is actually a mistake. We have 12 risks on the corporate risk register, and not 11, as I've stated in my report. The risk missing is risk number 3. And it should sit with that 7 that's on the chart that I have. The key messages I'd like to give are the following. We have 7 risks which are most significant, and in that red space where the risk is beyond our tolerance, particularly risk number 1, which is our financial risk. For that particular risk, the current exposure is the highest that we can give it, 25. And we think the future risk is still going to be the highest, and that's 25 as well. And that's despite putting in place any other arrangement that we can to try to mitigate that risk. So that is the highest risk we have. And then there are other risks. if I can just talk you through the key ones. Risk number 2, non-delivery of transformational change due to lack of corporate change function. This wording has been updated with the emphasis on corporate change. And what I'm trying to highlight there is that the organization is looking for not operational or service level change, but actually a much more transformative piece, which in themselves can be very difficult. And that's picked up in this particular risk. Risk number 9, which is also quite highly scored, is failure to prepare for the impact associated with climate change, including air quality and pollution with extreme weather, including flooding and heat. And we've seen some evidence of that, and that is again a risk that's showing at a relatively high area. And number 12, if I can just talk to that particular risk, unable to attract and retain scarce resource or those in high demand. There has been some evidence that actually, as a local authority, not just us, but a lot of other local authorities are struggling to make sure that they get the people that they need to do the work. The final point I would make is around some areas of risk which are not particularly scored as highly, only because the level of scoring on the likelihood is quite small. But as we've seen, particularly around the cyber area, that risk can become very extreme very fast if it happens. So I've just alerted to the committee that though the risk in terms of the management view is that it's at a level likelihood 3 out of 5, if it were a 5, it would be catastrophic potentially for the organization. And we have similarly risk around processes to safeguard vulnerable children and adults and health and safety. I'll just pause there and take any questions.
So it just mine is more about the comment and a bit of observation. So thank you for the report, Manish. It's thorough. So for instance, so if there is a power cut to our main servers and then is out of power, so the customer services will be out of for several days, just the plans that did you consider part of that kind of risk assessment, because that will have an enormous impact to our residents and to our services.
So there are 2 or 3 key things that authority has been put in place to respond to that. So there is an emergency response plan. What this should do is respond to any eventuality, including power outage, so that if we were unable to access all the data that we have in our building, we can access that through some other means. So that arrangement is in place. Prevention, I think, is always better than cure in these areas. So actually, it's what the authority has essentially done is maintained a record of its data in more than one data center. So what that basically means is that if we can't access our data where it is now, we have alternative sources to be able to get to that data. So that risk is I hasten to jinx anything, but we have put some controls in place around that risk.
Councillor Rossetti, then I'll come this side, and then Councillor Rowe.
In the text is the most significant red risk, and is 1, 2, 9, 12, and 5. But then in the amber it says 6, 8, and 4, and instead we had 4, I think, 11, 13, 7. So there is a bit of. The real question is about the registry, some code to understand, because this looks more of an action plan rather than possible mitigations. If this could be something that could be reported back to the audit committee or other, but also how much
Thank you, Councillor Bazzetti, and thank you for your previous point around the table. You're quite right. Yes, it should have been not an 8, it should have been a 3. So yeah, thank you for that. Just as we discussed the savings risk and making sure that the committee is appraised of where we are, I think we could take exactly the same approach with this particular risk and make sure the committee is updated for what steps the authority has taken in response to managing this area. So I'm happy to bring a paper to the next meeting with an update on that area too.
Councillor Worrell?
Thanks. Obviously my attention's drawn to the almost certain catastrophic risk around our viability. I just wondered, is there literally anything we can do to like make that less likely and less catastrophic without a kind of bigger intervention from the national government? Because it seems to me like with all the will in the world and with all the sort of measures that we attempt, it's going to remain in that most severe category without a change from national government. Is that a fair assessment?
So I'm not entirely sure if I'm the right person to ask that question to, but I'll try to give you an update from my perspective. And this is from an audit perspective. So I think the authority is trying everything it can to trying to mitigate this financial risk. And some of the key areas of trying to do that are around savings, transformation, efficiency, cost control, revenue generation. So all of those things are in the basket, and all of those things are actively being worked on. So in this year's audit plan, I have some of those areas in my sites to give assurance on. So I'll be capturing those. I think it's a very it just from the nature of the risk and the way it's presented, it is a very challenging picture for the authority. Absolutely. And it is incredibly hard at the moment for not just us, a lot of other people in the same sort of position to be able to meet the demand and the expectations of what a local authority is trying to do with the resources it has. So I'm not in a place where I can answer the question in the sense of is that enough or not, or what more we need, but it certainly is very challenging.
Res?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple minutes. So I think related to the financial viability, I mean, the areas that you have raised in other areas of this pack, that the authority is struggling with, so the property, the savings area, etc. These all have an impact on this one. Is that my fault? That's good. So I think trying to capture the stuff we're doing in those 3 or 4 areas and closing the loop of how they impact this risk is quite important, because the way we capture the risk mirrors what we've seen in other councils. That's just the reality of it. So if we can close that loop, that will be quite good, because those 4 areas consume a lot of financial resources. But also, especially the procurement, has the potential to help us save, if you know what I mean. Secondly, the transformational projects. In my experience, they also consume a lot of resources, and at the same time bring a lot of risk with some benefits, or with a lot of benefits. So I guess my question would be, at what point does this committee get sight of what those key category A programs are going to be pushed forward? Because from a risk perspective, they're likely to have a pervasive risk across the authority. So as an audit committee, we would need sight of those, especially how those risks are managed. And then lastly, on the cyber, just from the commentary, I guess I get a bit worried where the commentary is around, oh, we can't reduce the impact from a cyber risk perspective, but in actual fact, we can. Because if you look at it, if you look at your control environment for cyber, it's preventative, monitoring, detective, correction. And the detective and correction is where you reduce the impact. So for example, if you don't respond to an incident in 5 days versus 10 days, your impact is very different. So I think if you could get some feedback to the team that's looking after this, just to apply their minds a little bit more in taking into account the corrective or responsive actions and how that impacts the risk profile.
Thank you, Riaz. That's really helpful. Thank you. So just picking up on the point around procurement, savings, budget envelope. Absolutely. Look, the local authority, I think, is under no illusion that we should try to do everything as perfectly as we can, so that we maximize, every penny that we spend. And that is the ambition. Absolutely. So not just procurement, but other areas too. Absolutely. Yeah, we've got to try to do everything we can, and agreed. So from an audit perspective, certainly I will continue to carry out audits around the procurement areas, and I'll bring reports to the committee on the progress in terms of the specific recommendations, but more generally around some of the procurement activities too. Second, around transformation, I totally agree. And it can be quite long term as well. It can't be necessarily straight away, which is something we have to sort of embark on, but we might not realize the fruits for a while. I'm happy to ask the service to identify sort of transformation risk register, if that's the right phrase, that identifies what the key risks are across all the different category A projects, so that we know what they look like. And I'm happy to bring that to the next meeting, if that's helpful.
I think it's helpful because it helps the committee understand what the key benefits are of why we're committing this much resources to a transformational program, but then also helps the committee understand the risks that embarking on this program entails, and why we're taking on that risk.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Thank you, Minesh.
And just the final point
Yep.
on the cyber risk, just to be aware, the risk, the way we score risk is the worst case scenario. So the impact is always going to be 5 on a risk register, but that doesn't mean that some of the steps, exactly as you say, that we shouldn't be looking to mitigate some of the impacts. And only if we are absolutely confident that it's not going to be terrible, if we ever find ourselves in that position, will we change that score. But I still take your point to the service and make sure that some of the suggestions are captured.
Sorry, Minesh, I guess my key point is that the way the commentary is written is that the officers looking after the space is primarily looking at preventative type controls, which is great. But in this space specifically, you need to look at the whole spectrum.
Councillor Jameson. Councillor Jameson, could you please switch on your mic and speak to the mic?
Sorry. Adequate processes are not in place to safeguard vulnerable children and adults within the borough. And the impact would be 5, but it's always a possibility, which is concerning, isn't it? Because within our children's services, if we have a family with 3 children who have extraordinary special needs, that really pushes that department way over budget straight away. So the impact is 5 if we have basically a serious, really serious, if we have another baby P or Victoria Climbier, we've got a 5 on our hands.
So Councillor Jameson, yes, you're absolutely right. Look, if that risk was to materialise, it potentially could be quite bad for the authority. What's really key, though, is that we put in place appropriate controls, things that we do to try to stop that from happening, or if it does happen, to minimise its effect as much as we can. And that's what the service has basically identified in their risk register as their future actions and current procedures. What they're exactly. So what they're trying. What the authority is trying to do is make sure that the risk doesn't happen, and if it does happen, how do we make sure it doesn't get too bad?
Councillor Dagidis.
Just two questions. On page 423, 424, 15.2 paragraph, referring to this issue about estimated saving or loss, if you like, by one property, recovered or not, our housing property. And
Sorry, I think Councillor Diakidis, that might be the next paper.
sorry?
I think that might be the next paper, page 423.
That's the next paper, Councillor.
Oh, sorry.
So we're going to have the item next.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
if you can hold that question to the item.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So the recommendation for item 11 for the audit committee is asked to note the corporate risk register as at 31st of May 2025 attached at Appendix A. So that's been noted. So I'll move on to the next item, which is item 12, the Anti-Fraud and Corruption Progress Report, Quarter 4, 2024-2025. Can I invite Minesh to introduce his report?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the usual report that you get from me and my service around the activity we have undertaken on the anti-fraud space. And there has been a lot. So in quarter 4, the report details a number of different initiatives that are running or have been run to try to prevent and detect fraud. If I just walk you through the key areas, and the start for this is the fraud risk assessment. In our view, the fraud risk profile hasn't changed materially over the last year. It's about the same, which means that the activity that we are carrying out is similar to what we've done in the past. So the key areas of work are around proactively looking at the output from the National Fraud Initiative. This is essentially a data matching exercise that we are participants of nationally. And what it identifies is anomalies in how we've presented the data or in how the practice is operating. A good example here is that in recent times, the fraud risk around polygamous employment has increased. And this is where people are working for more than one place at the same time. So they could be working for us full time and another local authority at the same time. And the National Fraud Initiative is a very useful tool to help us identify where that might be happening and deal with it. Temporary accommodation. This is another proactive exercise that we've embarked on. And this is essentially to make sure that people who've come to us and sought our help in finding a home are truly deserving of that, and they haven't somehow misrepresented their position or their position has changed subsequently so that they don't need that support. So there's a proactive exercise going on there. One that's planned for this year, which hasn't really started, is around hidden assets. A lot of the services that we offer are essentially based on people's ability to be able to pay, and it's measured through a number of different channels. What's important is that actually as a local authority, if people tell us and appraise us of their financial position and that isn't a correct position, we're able to identify that and do something about that. Speaking with other local authorities, neighbouring authorities, where they've embarked on such activity, they've identified a number of instances where people have been dishonest and not disclosed their assets, where the authorities have been able to then take further action. And so that's something that we plan to do this year from about October onwards. And then the remainder of the report, if I speak to two main areas that the audit committee usually asks question on. The first is around housing. So we have a team that visit properties and essentially try to recover properties that might not be used properly, sublet or sometimes abandoned. I'm pleased to say that there were in the last year 42 properties that we recovered from that work, and we were able to stop 49 right to buy applications proceeding. So this is where people, our tenants, wish to buy their property, but actually there is some irregularity in their circumstances, and by doing the appropriate due diligence, we've been able to sort of say, well, actually, you're not eligible to be able to buy. An example, just to give an example on this, is I'm a tenant, but actually I'm subletting it to somebody else, and then I come back and say, can I buy the property, please? And in those circumstances, we will try to recover the unit and not sell the property. So that's just an example. The caseload for the team is increasing. We have a large number of properties that have been referred to us through various channels and from our proactive work, where we need to make further inquiries. But there are quite a large number. You'll see that in my paper, I've said there's still 452 ongoing investigations around the housing area. That's a significant increase from a year, 2 years ago, where typically we had about 250 ongoing inquiries. And similarly on the right to buy, because of the government's change of policy and the reduction in discount, a number of people have put in a right to buy application, a very large number, that we're working through in terms of carrying out the due diligence. So that's also increased. So the draw on the team. And then from pages 246 to 248, you'll see that there is an update on the work that we've done around the void property project. This is where essentially a number of our void properties have been occupied by squatters. And we were trying to understand how that cycle was working, because in effect, a number of these properties had become void very recently, and the squatters were able to move in. So we were trying to establish if there was a pattern of some type. So that work is still ongoing. And then around the no recourse to public funds and some of the other internal investigations. I'll just pause there and just take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Diaguides.
Yeah. Referring to that paragraph that I said before on page 423 to 424, so the bottom and top, you are putting again here the figures about what the cost or the saving is of an extra property being recovered. As you know, we're very, very aware of the old figure of the £18,000. That was £18,000 a year at the time, the comparative. Now I see in the update here that you have a revision. You're referring to first an update to 42,000 and then to 78,300. Certainly the 78,300 cannot be the annual saving. Is it some kind of total? So you could explain that, because the application of that is much wider than just the fraud work is about building or selling council flats, etc. You know, that kind of thing. It has that kind of thing. So that's the one question. Just quickly, you did refer to the workload and the increase in referrals. When I looked at the reports 3 or 4 days ago, I remember a table, but I can't find it now, where you were saying about the referrals that had been on the tenancy fraud, the beginning, etc. And you showed quite a big increase, very big increase, and also ending up the year with much higher outstanding review work than before. Is that the case? And I can't find the table now, but is that the case? And if it is there an implication for your workload? In other words, is there something that you need more resources at this moment in time to extract? Because the figures, if I remember rightly, are quite high, something like 500 cases still open or something like this. You know, should we do something about it rather than let them fester?
So thank you, Councillor Diakides. So the first question around the value. So the £18,000 figure, if I'm not mistaken, actually came from the Audit Commission back in the day, and it was for the savings attributable for each unit that we recovered, not necessarily per annum. It was just a figure, but it's a really old figure. I mean, we're talking about the Audit Commission a long time ago. So that number's now been updated, and the number that's used more recently is that £42,000 figure, and that is something that a lot of local authorities are using to attribute to a recovery of a unit. So that's essentially what they believe it is. But interestingly, as I've indicated there, the Cabinet Office have quoted an even higher figure of 78,000, which they believe is the true cost to a local authority of not having a unit available to it to rent properly. And
that's what I mean. The 18,000, I knew what exactly it meant. This is how much we would have been getting if we had the property ourselves. This is how much we pay on the average on temporary accommodation or bed and breakfast, etc. Therefore, that's the difference is 18,000 a year. And it was tying very nicely at the time. Now, this 78,000, I don't know what it means. You know, it's not that difference. So what is it? What does it mean? We say £78,000.
Councillor Diakides, essentially it's the same principle, but just a different number at the as the outcome. So now, especially with the changes in the rental market of the properties, the estimate from the Cabinet Office as to what they believe each unit is worth to a local authority is 78,000. Now, I'm not intending to use that in my reporting to the committee in terms of what I believe the savings to be. I'll be using the 42,000, which actually is the more common figure used by other local authorities. But it's quite interesting to sort of just highlight what other people think the value of a property could be to a local authority if it's being misused. And in some cases, that 78,000 is not a sort of an outlier. I think in certain circumstances, it could definitely be that. Absolutely. There was a case, if I can just recall, a few years ago, we investigated and prosecuted someone for subletting. And in that particular example, this was a few years ago, we still had a potential loss of at least 50,000 just for subletting for a few years.
Is in referrals and the workload.
I think, look, I'll need to do a little bit more work, but on the face of it, yes, I think if we are to go through all those 450 odd caseload, yes, we will need more resources.
Thank you, Minesh. Okay, so if there's no any further questions on this item, the recommendation is the audit committee is recommended to note the activities of the team during the Q4 of 2024 and 2025. So I'll move on to the next item, which is the Treasury Management Report. So can I now invite Sam Masters to introduce his report? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. All right, so I'm pleased to present the management outcome 24-25. Key parts of so taking two cases in the external context, the external economic context, both global and UK specific. Then section 3 takes us on to the local context, i.e. the metrics and the narrative that goes along with Harringay's topics. So first paragraph to note 3.1. Table 1 gives us our balance sheet position as at the so our total capital financing requirement was 1.331 billion, with a net position of 1.258 billion. This being apportioned out to external borrowing of 981 million, with internal borrowing 276 million. Paragraph 3.3, table 2, gives us further analysis on the borrowing position. So of that 981 million external borrowing, 906 of that was long-term borrowing, i.e. borrowing over a year, and then 75 million of that was short-term borrowing. Our investment position at the end of March, 3.6 billion. I'll take you through to section 4. So our borrowing strategy remains the same. So as outlined in the Treasury Management Strategy, Council's primary objective when borrowing is to strike an appropriate low risk balance between uncertainty over seen substantial rises in interest rates since 2021, with many central banks have now begun to reduce their policy rates. Gilt yields were volatile, and Table 3 gives us shows us gilt yield rising over the year, over the various different durations. And much of the increase in those rates were in response to market concerns that policies introduced by the new Labour government will be inflationary, and I think we have seen that, and lead to higher levels than anticipated of government borrowing. The election of Trump, of course, in November was also expected to lead to inflationary trade policies, and I think we've seen by his actions around tariffs that has been borne out. Table 4 gives us the increase in PW public works loan over the year. 5 or so.
Do you wanna switch that mic off, because it's yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. Where was I? Yeah, so we've seen a gradual increase in PWLB rates of around circa 50 basis points over the 12 months to March 25. Although it's outside the scope of this report, we are seeing those rates coming down in 25, 26. Table 5, paragraph 4.11 gives us a further analysis on our borrowing position. So out of the 981 million we had borrowed, 806 of that being from the Public Works and Loan Board, 100 million of that being LOBOs. So LOBOs are lender option, borrower option loans. And then, so that makes up our long-term borrowing percentage, and then 75 million of that being from local authorities. So table 6, paragraph 4.15 gives us our LOBO position at year end. So at year end, we had outstanding 100 million LOBO loans. It should be noted that the interest rates that Haringey is actually paying on LOBOs is in comparison to other local authorities is actually not too bad. I've seen other local authorities that have sort of double-digit interest rates attached to their LOBO loans. So actually, we are not too. And in Q1, although again, outside the scope of this report, we've been able to negotiate the repayment at par of 50 million of those LOGO loans. So if we take on to section 5, our investment activity. So our principal concerns when making investments are security, liquidity, and return in that order. The table 7 details our investment position at year end. So we had 13.6 million of money market funds, 13.6 million of council funds invested in money market funds at year end. Table 8 details the reduction in the Bank of England base rate over the year of 75 basis points. Table 9 then gives us some benchmarking around our investment activity compared to other local authorities. So similar local authorities means other large London local authorities, and all local authorities is all local authorities across the UK. So we're very much part of the pack per that table. So section 6, Treasury performance. Table 10 then details our cost v budget around borrowing costs and investment income. So you'll note for general fund borrowing and investment income, we were largely on budget, For HRA borrowing, we were quite significantly under budget, but this was because the HRA were effectively at year end over borrowed internally. So they were borrowed from the general fund as opposed to where they should have been borrowed externally. So this is effectively what has led to that variance. So section 8 takes us on to compliance. So table 11 details our debt limits. So per the Treasury Management Strategy statement, we have 2 limits set via that document. The first being the authorised limit. That is a statutory limit at which the council's borrowing cannot exceed. And then in conjunction with that, we have the operational boundary. The operational boundary being a more prudent, more realistic cap that you would want on your investment, on your borrowing. You will note for overall, we were well within those limits. However, on this table, you will see from PFI and finance leases that we exceeded both the operational and authorised limit. So that's not really a true reflection of the situation. Unfortunately, when these limits were set by the TMS, they did not reflect the first year of adoption of IFRS 16, which means that more leases were brought onto the balance sheet essentially. So that will be revised and adjusted going forward in the new Treasury Management Strategy. Yeah. So section 9 then brings us on to our prudential indicators or Treasury Management indicators. The Treasury Management Strategy sets and stipulates a whole range of different limits and indicators. And so without going into every single one of these, we were compliant with all indicators other than our liquidity indicator. So there is a voluntary limit that we have set of minimum liquidity, so i.e. how much cash we have on hand at any one time, which was 30 million. So unfortunately, on the 31st of March, that dipped to 13.6 million, which ties back to our investment values at year end. And that was driven by a much larger than expected outflow of cash surrounding our capital schemes. Now that breach lasted for 24 hours, less than 24 hours. It happened on 31st of March, and we had adjusted that position. We were above the 30 million minimum by the 1st of April. So 31st of March was the Monday. So by lunchtime, the 1st of April, we were above that level again. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Any questions? I got Councillor Rossetti. I got Councillor Worrell.
Table 5, borrowing position. There are additional net movement of 35 million of borrowing from local authorities. And if I understand correctly, the table, this is one of the highest average interest rate.
Yeah, that's correct.
So was it a deliberate choice, and why, for instance, from local authorities rather than the public board or other banks with lower interest rates? Thanks.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I wasn't here for during that period. I joined a few months ago, so I can't attest to what the methodology behind that bit. But even though there might be higher borrowing costs, it's not unreasonable to have a spread of different counterparties. So, you know, it's you know, because there are different sort of pros and cons to each, you know, form of borrowing. So that may have driven the policy at the time. But apologies, I'm afraid it's my predecessor who took these loans out, so I can't speak to this.
Is that okay, Councillor Satish?
Yes.
Okay.
So what the heading, the board 31st of March 24, so one it would be 25.
Yes, yeah, right. Well spotted. Yes, I did spot that as I was saying here. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Worrell.
Thanks. I just wanted to go back to what you said about the Lobo loans. So am I understanding correctly that there's a risk that with the ones that have call dates within the next year, these lenders could kind of hit us with an increase, and then it says about the council repaying the loan at no additional cost and potentially having to borrow to do that. So does that mean that we could kind of end up with like borrowing costs stacked on?
Yeah, so at each call date, the lender has the option to adjust the interest rate, and if we don't agree with the increase in rates, we have the option to repay it. Now, a lot of those loans were structured that they have very high exit penalties for local authorities. So this is why you know, some of these loans were issued in the 80s. I don't think that applies here, but you know, so this is why you see across local authorities that this is still an issue. I think we're quite fortunate in terms of the rates that we have got on these Lobos. They are not the highest I've ever seen, and they actually are not that high off market rates anyway. But if we did choose to repay it, we would enter into a period of negotiation with the bank and see what we can achieve. And like I said, in Q1, we've actually been able to repay 50 million of these at par. And so the fair value of those loans was 58 million, but we've repaid them at 50 million. So although it's an accounting achievement, we're repaying, they're valued at 58 million on the balance sheet, but we're repaying them at 50, right? So, but yeah, you're quite right. If we needed to replace that financing, there would be arrangement fees and various other fees if we were going to go to the PWLB. But as we're seeing rates come down, the bank rate come down, we're seeing those PWLB rates come down, it's very likely we'll be able to replace them at a cheaper interest rate than we're currently holding them at. Yep.
Okay. Councillor Dagidis.
So, first of all, on that particular point, I wanted to ask, there's something obviously on the wording of the report that's not quite right. It says that within the next few months or whatever, within the year, there will be the first 3 of the Lobo loans would come up. Well, according to the table 6, that the call date was the 10th of April. Therefore, it should have been already done. I didn't understand whether.
Sorry,
if you look, the call date for the first 3 of the loans.
Yes, that's right. So that would have been this financial year. So when I refer to we've been successfully able to renegotiate 50 million.
Have we done that?
Yes, we have.
But it's not referred to in the report. That's what I'm saying.
Well, yes, so that will be reported in Q1 of this financial year. So when I sit in front of you with the Q1 report for 25-26, we will have a.
So we've got rid of the 50 million first of all.
Yeah, and the fair value of those loans was 58.
No, excellent.
So that is actually quite good achievement.
At last, that's for years. Yeah, we're trying to do things. Just again is probably a matter of presentation on table 5. I started by looking at, say,
Yeah, I do apologise. I've noticed that.
public works
24
loan board, 69, you add them, there's 40 million, 40 million short. And then you look at it and then you realize that the 40 million, it was what was previously under the first column, and it should be added there. Am I right? So it's just,
Sorry,
all right. Now it says on the 31st of March, 24, presumably means 25. Yeah, as we said, yeah. That the balance is 806 million.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, but
yeah.
that should read
But
25.
if you add the previous 2 columns on that one, it should be 766. Okay.
Oh, okay. If there's a mathematical error in there, yes, I will.
Yeah, and then you find out that you add 40 and 35 makes 75 from borrowing from the local authorities, the short term, if you like, borrowing, and that's where the 40 million
Okay,
appear.
no, I'll go away and have a look at that. That's fine.
Well, so what it means, in other words, if I understand it right, is that we haven't changed at all the position as regards the short term borrowing.
So the short-term borrowing has increased from last year end was 40 million, was up to 75.
But if you go on the previous page, table 4, is it the one? No, sorry, where is it? Oh, yeah, no, table 2 on page 438. You see the figures there match perfectly if the short-term borrowing 40 million.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that PWLB figure.
So it's probably just a matter of presentation, but effectively we haven't changed the level of short-term
no problem.
Borrowing is the same. Yeah. That's what I was.
That the question?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, just trying to understand the table because I got a bit confused with the figures not adding up. Okay.
Figures could be corrected.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. If there's a
and there's no changes for the short-term borrowing.
Yeah. Sure.
And the question, there are no changes.
No, absolutely. Okay. And definitely now we have agreed to refinance the 50 million, the half of the loan.
So that's already happened, and that happened in Q1, and we will.
Yeah, okay, excellent. That's very good news. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I have a question. Is that okay? So if you go back to 9.4, it's interesting that Councillor Daigenis didn't pick that up, but I thought that I should I should ask that question. So in terms of the breach for the prudential indicator, that's 30 million. What does that mean for the council? Because the actual figure was 13.6, but we end up paying from Treasury 30 million. Is that my understanding?
No, so 30 million is the minimum level of cash that we want to have available. So those will be cash deposits or highly liquid investments, like instant access investments like the money market funds. So that dips below that level, and like I said, it was for less than 24 hours, and that was driven by a huge amount of capital invoices a rush of capital invoices in the last week of March being paid through that had not been adequately modelled within our cash flow projections.
So that's the reason.
That's the reason. So we saw 56 million go out the door that week, and the cash flow projections were projecting around 6 to 10 million. So it was a significant.
It was
a significant variance to what we were expecting. We were taken aback by it, but and so we've taken some corrective measures. So we reissued guidance around large payments. So any payments over £200,000 now require them to specifically notify us. So when I say they, I'm talking about budget holders. We have, we believe, improved our cash flow modelling significantly. We are, and we're also now looking at replacing the very outdated logo tech system that we use with a much better system called Treasury Live, which is part of the PS Live environment of programs.
Could you provide assurance that this won't repeat itself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that we believe we've now taken the corrective measures that will prevent this from happening again, i.e. improving that cash flow modeling, much more sophisticated, much more in depth, and also the guidance that is now being issued to our budget holders around. And we won't just issue it once. It will be a repeat reminder. You have an obligation to tell us if you're going to be paying these very large invoices, because it's very difficult from the treasury management side, because we only see it as the backs file comes in.
Yeah.
And if that backs file needs to be paid in 3 days, well, our arrangement period for further borrowing is 5 days with the PWB. So it puts us on the back foot. So we put the emphasis out there with the budget holders to make sure that, where they are, where there are completion dates around a large capital scheme, there might be a £10 million payment, whatever needs to go, that we need 10 days notification. And because those dates are built into the capital contract, so they should not take the budget holders by surprise. So they have adequate periods of time to notify us. Yeah.
So my next question was, if you didn't realize that by mid-afternoon, would that figure has gone up even more?
Mid-afternoon of the day?
Yeah, that's.
So I just want to emphasize, there was at no point during that period was there any chance that the council could not pay their invoices. There were no salary runs threatened by this.
Okay.
This was simply an internal minimum cash value that we had dipped below, but we were perfectly solvent. There was no question around our ability to pay anything. We still had almost £40 million within the bank. So.
Yeah, but it's really important for you that you provide no assurance that this will not repeat itself.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we only got 10. The recommendation for this report is to note the treasury management activity undertaken during the financial year to 31st of March 2025 and the performance achieved, which is attached as Appendix 1 to this report. Recommendation 2 is to note all the treasury activities were undertaken in line with the approved treasury management strategy. Thank you. Okay, so